Good evening, Pottstown. My name is Christine Latch. I am a candidate for your English teacher position for 7th grade. I will be driving to school tomorrow when you call me on, or when I join your Zoom call. So I wanted to kind of walk you through my lesson plan now. So here is a brief 5-minute overview, if that's possible for a 50-minute lesson. Okay, so I start with an essential question. I like to have students kind of think about how school fits into the grand scheme of things, of course. And here's my essential question. It's just a sample idea of one. And it talks about how nonfiction texts link us to the history in the past since we were using social studies content. And then how can specific evidence or specific information in a text explain ideas? I move on from that to determining the central meaning in a text and analyzing the craft and structure. That's some of the standards that we're going to look at. To begin my lesson plan, I like to get my students thinking. And if this is a 9th grade class, we know that 9th graders like to talk and argue. So giving them an anticipation reaction guide so that they could determine if they agree or disagree to certain statements would give them the opportunity to do it in a very structured way. So of course, if they disagree with some sort of statement, they would have the chance to share and explain why. And these statements, of course, would correspond to civil rights movement or historical content information. I chose MLK's I Have a Dream speech because it's the first thing I thought of. And there's just so many different topics to talk about in social studies. So part of my activation to activate background knowledge and to get my students ready for what we're going to be doing for the day would involve discussing how authors, writers, people who are stars in movies, they always have some sort of message that's embedded in their story. It's what empowers their writing. It motivates readers. It motivates the viewer. So this I would explain to my class, and I would show them the background video here, which is kind of actually really interesting for a 2-minute clip. That way we have a visual and auditory as well as some things on paper, which you will see next. So our direct instruction would involve letting the class know exactly what we're going to be learning today. Hopefully at the end of the day, they can go home from school and tell mom and dad exactly what they learned in English class, because we know students always say exactly what they learned. So that's kind of my goal as a teacher this year, is to have my class be able to say that. And I would like them to be able to say that they are going to analyze the central idea in a story or text and how it develops. And then, of course, they would have to look at specific meanings of words. And there's so many in I Have a Dream. And today we would be looking at I Have a Dream. I chose this through Newsela because this is such a great resource, because it would obviously level the text for me. It includes a read out loud, which is fantastic accommodation, and level it for my group work. So I could demonstrate a model lesson doing a read out loud where I would do a think out loud and an annotation, and I would use Cami to annotate and explain by pointing to specific evidence in a text, using a graphic organizer or this Jamboard to collaborate some of our ideas. And I'll share more about that when I get to the graphic organizer. And I would model and demonstrate for that. So following modeling and demonstration, I would ask students to work in groups, and I chose a jigsaw because I really like them. Obviously, this is where I would really have all of my accommodations. The text that we would use as I Have a Dream would be leveled per group, and the task would also be leveled per group. So that's one way I would need to use my data so that I know which group was where, based on their proficiency standards. So each group would have a task, and of course, if I have a few students, according to the directions, that would have IEPs or specific disabilities, and I would be able to implement them right in here. And this is the perfect spot for them. So one group would be responsible for finding examples of repetition in the text. They would add analysis and commentary to our graphic organizer and our interactive whiteboard. And then each group would be responsible for something else. And there's so many different options here. I could break it down to pairs. I could add bigger groups or larger number of students in groups. I could allow student choice or examples of higher order thinking for different students if there were other students who were gifted or on higher ability levels. And I would give students about 20 minutes or so to work in groups. They would be responsible for coming up with one example per person of an exact quote from the text to explain to the class and share their commentary. Obviously, the classroom teacher should circulate around the room, and each student will be also responsible for annotating the text as well at their desk. I think every student needs to annotate at all times, but what English teacher doesn't? Also, once they would finish doing their reading and their annotating and collaborating as a group, coming up with their 3 examples, they would add their commentary and analysis into the Jamboard. Finally, the last step, of course, in a jigsaw is that they would all share as a group. I love doing that. That way we can incorporate social emotional learning on a regular basis where students are working together. And then our independent work is our kind of independent writing assignment. It is an exit slip, kind of just evaluating what the students learned from this. And of course, the teacher would be responsible for adding some information and guiding the groups to where they needed to be at the end of the day. And then the teacher, of course, would be responsible for supporting students who needed more work or needed more help in certain areas, or challenging and extending them. And I love the thought of modeling Martin Luther King in your own words by writing your own speech, just like Martin Luther King did, using such devices. And that would be a fun activity for the future. So as a closure, I would allow students, I would explain to students how writing is an empowering thing. The message comes across and it can motivate people. It's really important to analyze the language that happens in a text and so on and so forth. This is where, of course, your teacher would sign a homework or review things. I like to do a 3-2-1 as a review on a regular basis. That's a quick, easy way to see who's understanding what. And in terms of the accommodations for all of my students, it's really important, of course, to note that I would have to talk to the special education teacher and check out the IEP, read it for myself, and see whatever accommodations are listed, as well as the intermediate unit for the auditory support and the auditory specialist. If there's a microphone that's involved or other technology that I need to be aware of, this is all, I'm sure, in the IEP. And I'd like to include visuals both on the computer and handouts, level the text, chunk the assignments, and incorporate social and emotional learning. I did include some resource links here. This is where I got my background information. Here's where I could level each text under the Newsella. And then I used this handout for domain-specific vocabulary, considering this particular lesson is highly dependent on students already knowing certain literary terms, which would be pre-taught, as well as the challenging vocabulary that they would encounter in that exact lesson plan. And for the assessment, I will show you that the exit slip that I created. For the assessment, I would use that information so I would know exactly where they were, if they were basic or proficient or below basic or advanced in each concept, so I know if they were grasping the concepts taught for the day. Here is an example of it. I did include it up here. My face is in the way. So here's an exit slip. It's really a general one, but it includes them identifying the purpose of the speech based on the conversation that happens in class and their group work. It asks the students to identify one literary device, in particular, one example of figurative language, metaphors. So I ask which one stands out the most. Again, more questions for specific answers, using students' opinions and evaluation skills about how they think about what they read and learned together. And then explain why you think, what type of figurative language did they do in their groups, and explain why I think he used this technique and if it was effective. So they get the opportunity to evaluate it. Of course, I did not require this because this is a pretend assignment for you. And then I created some visuals where students would be responsible for working together and collaborating. I love interactive whiteboards or other technology. This was the first one I thought of for today. Some visuals for students who need some support there, and some cues, some directions for our group work, and a jigsaw. And again, some more directions in group work for a jigsaw, which I expect students to already know at certain parts of the year. It's going into the second quarter now. Definitely some ideas. Some students sometimes don't know how to start ideas. So this is a visual representation for students to have some ideas on how to collaborate in group work. And then I would have sample responses here for them so that they would know exactly what was expected of them and they could model my sample response. And then finally, a graphic organizer. This one, unfortunately, was a PDF that I copied and pasted in here. It didn't turn out as great, but it would definitely include a graphic organizer so they could see where and how to organize their ideas. I know I spoke pretty quickly. You are welcome to pause this video and rewind at any point. If you need any help and clarification, please let me know. Again, this is a basic overview. It pretty much gets students on point thinking about things and working together to come up with new ideas about a text. If there's any questions, please let me know. And it specifically points to evidence. That's one really important factor. I don't know if I mentioned. Of course, if there's anything else, please let me know. Again, there's an exit slip. Those are the standards. Here is the student handout, and I've attached everything here for you. I'm going to share this with you in links. So here's a link. Obviously, you know where the links are. You can scroll through and take a peek for yourselves. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thanks.